Blind rescue dog refuses to leave hospital room, and the reason will make you cry. The security cameras at St. Mary's General Hospital captured something extraordinary at 3:47 a.m. that changed everything. A golden retriever, his cloudy eyes unseeing, but his determination unwavering, somehow managed to slip through the automatic doors of the emergency room. What happened next would leave doctors, nurses, and millions of people worldwide questioning everything they thought they knew about the power of love. I was the first to find them, Nurse Sarah Mitchell recalls, her voice still trembling with emotion months later. When I walked into room 412 for my morning rounds, I saw this scruffy golden retriever curled up beneath Mr. Anderson's bed, as if he'd always belonged there. But it was impossible. We didn't allow pets in the hospital, and more importantly, this dog was completely blind. James Anderson, a beloved 78-year-old retired high school teacher, had been fighting a losing battle with pancreatic cancer for the past 3 weeks in that very room. Known for his gentle smile and kind words, even through excruciating pain, James had become a favorite among the hospital staff. But nobody knew about Charlie, at least not yet. The story of how Charlie came into James's life 3 years earlier was just as remarkable as his midnight journey to the hospital. After losing Martha, his wife of 50 years, to a sudden heart attack, James found himself drowning in an ocean of grief. Their modest Seattle home, once filled with Martha's laughter and the smell of her famous apple pies, had become unbearably quiet. "I didn't plan on adopting that day," James would later tell Sarah during one of their many late-night conversations. "I just couldn't stand the silence anymore. I thought maybe visiting the shelter would help me feel less alone." His voice had cracked as he continued, "That's when I saw Charlie." Charlie had been surrendered to the Seattle Animal Shelter 6 months earlier when his previous owners couldn't or wouldn't deal with his progressive blindness. A degenerative condition had slowly stolen his sight, and with it, his family's love. Day after day, potential adopters would pass by his kennel, their interest fading the moment they learned about his disability. But something about the dignified way Charlie held himself, despite everything he'd lost, spoke to James's broken heart. Here was this beautiful soul who had lost everything, just like me, James had explained. But he hadn't lost his spirit. When I knelt down beside his kennel, he pressed his nose against my hand and sighed, like he'd been waiting for me all along. The shelter staff had been hesitant about letting a 75-year-old widower adopt a blind dog. They warned James about the challenges, the special care Charlie would need, the potential difficulties. But James was adamant. "We need each other," he told them simply. "Sometimes the best healing comes from helping someone else heal." For 3 years, James and Charlie had created their own little world. James spent countless hours helping Charlie map their neighborhood, using different textures on the sidewalk as markers. He developed special whistles and gentle taps to guide Charlie, and soon they had their own silent language of love and trust. Their daily routine became the talk of the neighborhood. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., they would walk to the local park, Charlie's shoulder brushing against James's leg for guidance. They'd sit on the same bench, sharing breakfast, James with his coffee and toast, Charlie with his special senior dog treats. Children would stop to pet Charlie, amazed at how he could sense their presence before they even spoke. "That dog saw more with his heart than most people see with their eyes," Mrs. Thompson, their next-door neighbor, would later tell reporters. "The way he navigated their home, the way he knew exactly when Mr. Anderson was sad or in pain, it was like watching a miracle every day." But 6 months ago, their world shattered again. James's persistent stomach pain turned out to be stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis was grim, but James's only concern was for Charlie. He arranged for Mrs. Thompson to care for Charlie while he underwent treatment at St. Mary's, making her promise to maintain Charlie's routine as much as possible. For 3 weeks, Charlie had stayed with Mrs. Thompson, growing more listless by the day. He refused to eat, spending hours sitting by the front door, his unseeing eyes fixed in the direction of the hospital. "It was like he knew," Mrs. Thompson would later say, wiping tears from her eyes. "He just knew something was terribly wrong." Then came that mysterious night when Charlie disappeared. Mrs. Thompson had gone to bed at her usual time, making sure all doors and gates were securely locked. But somehow Charlie had managed to escape. Security footage from various street cameras would later piece together his incredible journey. The blind dog navigating busy streets, crossing intersections, somehow knowing exactly where to go. No one could explain how Charlie had made it to the hospital, let alone found his way to the exact floor and room where James lay fighting for his life. But as Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway of room 412 that morning, watching the gentle rise and fall of both man and dog breathing in sync, she knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a story that would touch millions of hearts and challenge everything we think we know about the bonds between humans and animals. Charlie's journey to room 412 was more than just a miracle. It was about to become a powerful lesson in love, loyalty, and the incredible capacity of the heart to see what the eyes cannot. The morning Sarah Mitchell discovered Charlie in room 412 could have ended very differently. Hospital protocols were clear, no unauthorized animals allowed. But when Dr. Elena Rodriguez, head of oncology, arrived to assess the situation, what she witnessed stopped her in her tracks. "I came prepared to call animal control," Dr. Rodriguez remembers, her professional demeanor softening at the memory. "But then I saw something I'd never witnessed in 20 years of medicine. James's vital signs, which had been erratic for days, had completely stabilized. His pain levels, which usually spiked in the morning, were the lowest we'd seen since his admission. Charlie, despite his blindness, had positioned himself perfectly beside James's bed, his head resting gently on the mattress near James's hand. He wasn't interfering with any of the medical equipment. In fact, he seemed to understand exactly where he could and couldn't go. When nurses came to check James's vitals, Charlie would quietly shift out of the way, only to return to his vigilant position moments later. The first time James woke up to find Charlie beside him, the entire floor heard his cry of joy. "My boy," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "You found me." The nurses on duty would later describe how Charlie's tail, which hadn't moved since his arrival, began to wag so hard his whole body shook. Dr. Rodriguez made an unprecedented decision that morning. Instead of removing Charlie, she began the paperwork to register him as a therapy dog. "Sometimes in medicine, we have to acknowledge that there are things we don't fully understand," she explained. The impact Charlie had on James's condition wasn't just emotional, it was measurable. His blood pressure improved, his need for pain medication decreased, and for the first time since his admission, he showed signs of genuine hope. Word of the blind dog who had found his way to his dying owner spread through the hospital like wildfire. Staff members from every department found excuses to pass by room 412. Pediatric patients would stop by with their parents, drawing strength from Charlie's quiet courage. Even the hospital's most hardened veterans found themselves moved to tears by the sight of the faithful dog keeping his silent vigil. One of the most remarkable aspects of Charlie's presence was his ability to anticipate James's pain spikes before they registered on any monitors. He would become restless about 20 minutes before James's pain levels would rise, Sarah explains. He'd lift his head and whine softly. Just once. The first few times, we didn't understand what he was trying to tell us. But soon we learned to take it as a signal to check on James and administer his pain medication before the pain became severe. The media caught wind of the story, and reporters began gathering outside St. Mary's, eager to document the extraordinary tale. But Charlie remained focused solely on James, uninterested in the attention he was receiving. Local news stations aired footage from the security cameras showing Charlie's incredible journey, and social media exploded with shares and comments from people touched by their story. Perhaps the most profound impact was on the other patients in the oncology ward. There was a shift in the entire floor's energy, remembers Marie Chen, a social worker at St. Mary's. Patients who had been withdrawing from treatment found new determination. Family members who had been losing hope spoke of Charlie as a symbol of unconditional love and loyalty. He became more than just a dog. He became a beacon of hope. James, despite his weakening condition, would spend hours telling visitors about his life with Charlie. He shared stories of their morning walks, of how Charlie had memorized every room in their house, of the special ways they communicated. "Love doesn't need eyes to see," he would say, his hand resting on Charlie's head. "It needs a heart that's willing to understand." The hospital's administrative board, initially concerned about liability issues, found themselves moved by the mounting evidence of Charlie's positive impact. They began discussing the possibility of establishing a formal pet therapy program, inspired by the blind dog who had transformed their oncology ward. As James's condition continued to decline, Charlie's devotion only grew stronger. He refused to eat unless James was awake and encouraging him. He stayed alert through the night, his unseeing eyes always oriented toward James's face. When James's breath would grow labored, Charlie would gently rest his chin on his chest, and mysteriously, James's breathing would ease. What we witnessed in room 412 wasn't just a heartwarming story of a pet's loyalty, Dr. Rodriguez would later write in her medical journal. It was a profound demonstration of the healing power of love, a power that, perhaps, we in the medical profession sometimes underestimate. But even as Charlie's presence brought comfort to everyone around him, time was running out for James. The cancer was spreading, and both man and dog seemed to sense that their remarkable reunion would soon come to an end. Yet the legacy they were creating would extend far beyond the walls of room 412, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. As James Anderson's story spread beyond the walls of St. Mary's, something remarkable began happening at animal shelters across Seattle. People started showing up specifically asking about special needs pets. Dogs and cats that had been overlooked for months or even years suddenly found themselves the center of attention. It was like Charlie had opened people's eyes to what was possible, says Linda Martinez, director of the Seattle Animal Shelter, where Charlie had once waited for his forever home. We had a blind German shepherd who'd been with us for 2 years. The day after James and Charlie's story aired on local news, 5 different families came to meet her. They all said the same thing. If Charlie could do it, why not her? Back at St. Mary's, room 412 had become something of a sanctuary. The hospital staff had noticed that patients who visited James and Charlie often required less anxiety medication afterward. Children facing difficult procedures would stop by for what they called their Charlie Courage Boost. Even family members of other patients found comfort in spending a few quiet moments watching the blind dog, who had defied all odds to be with his person. One particularly touching moment came when Emma, a 7-year-old cancer patient, refused to walk after her surgery. Her doctors were concerned about potential complications if she didn't start moving, but Emma was too frightened of the pain. That's when Sarah had an idea. I had noticed how Charlie would walk perfect circles around James's bed during his daily exercise, Sarah recalls, her eyes brightening at the memory. So I asked Emma if she'd like to help Charlie with his walks. The next thing we knew, she was slowly making her way around the oncology ward, holding Charlie's leash while he gently guided her, matching his pace perfectly to her tentative steps. James watched all of this from his bed, his pride in Charlie evident despite his growing weakness. He's always known what people needed, James told Dr. Rodriguez one evening. Even before he lost his sight, he had this gift for finding the ones who were hurting the most. Maybe losing his eyes just helped him see with his heart more clearly. The media attention intensified as more incredible details of Charlie's journey emerged. Traffic camera footage revealed how the blind dog had waited patiently at crosswalks, somehow sensing the flow of traffic. He had navigated through a construction site, across a busy shopping district, and through a park he'd never visited before, all to reach James. Animal behaviorists and scientists began studying the footage, fascinated by Charlie's apparent ability to navigate without sight. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a leading expert in animal cognition, proposed a groundbreaking study on the sensory capabilities of blind dogs, inspired by Charlie's extraordinary feat. What Charlie accomplished challenges our understanding of canine navigation, Dr. Thompson explained in a widely shared interview. The bond between him and James appears to have activated capabilities we didn't even know dogs possessed. It's making us rethink everything we thought we knew about the limitations of blind animals. As James's condition deteriorated, Charlie's behavior began to change subtly. The hospital staff noticed he became more insistent about staying physically close to James, often positioning himself so that his body was in constant contact with some part of his beloved owner. His alerting whines before James's pain spikes became more frequent, as if he was trying to warn the staff that time was growing short. One night, during a particularly difficult episode, James confided in Sarah something that would stay with her forever. "Charlie taught me that the worst kind of blindness isn't losing your sight," he whispered. his voice weak but clear. It's losing hope. When Martha died, I was stumbling in the dark. But Charlie showed me there was still a path forward, and now he's showing everyone else the same thing. The impact of their story continued to ripple outward. A famous documentary filmmaker began collecting footage for a feature about their journey. Children's books about Charlie started appearing in hospital gift shops. A local artist painted a mural of Charlie on the wall of the Seattle Animal Shelter, with the words, "Love sees with the heart," written beneath it. But perhaps the most profound change was happening within St. Mary's itself. The hospital board, moved by the overwhelming evidence of Charlie's positive impact, fast-tracked the development of their new pet therapy program. They began partnering with local shelters to train therapy dogs, with a special focus on animals with disabilities. Charlie and James showed us that healing isn't just about medicine, Dr. Rodriguez noted in her journal. It's about connection, hope, and the kind of love that transcends all barriers, even the barrier between species. As June turned to July, the heat of summer settled over Seattle. In room 412, Charlie maintained his vigil, his dedication unwavering even as James's voice grew weaker and his lucid moments became fewer. The entire hospital seemed to hold its breath, knowing that this extraordinary chapter was nearing its end, yet hoping for just a few more days of witnessing this remarkable display of love and loyalty. As July wore on, the staff at St. Mary's began to notice subtle but significant changes in Charlie's behavior. The blind dog, who had maintained his quiet dignity throughout his time at the hospital, started spending more time with his head resting directly over James's heart. His previously occasional whimpers became more frequent, as if he was trying to communicate something that the medical equipment couldn't detect. It was like he knew something we didn't, Dr. Rodriguez remembers, her voice softening. Our monitors showed James's condition was declining, but Charlie seemed to understand exactly how much time was left. One particularly memorable evening, just as the sun was setting over Seattle's skyline, James experienced a moment of unexpected clarity. The nurses called it a rally, that mysterious phenomenon where terminal patients suddenly become more alert and energetic, often near the end. For a few precious hours, James was almost his old self again. "I need to tell Charlie's story," he insisted, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Sarah, who had grown close to both James and Charlie over the past month, quickly brought her phone to record his words. What followed was a testimony that would later move millions to tears. "People think Charlie's journey to find me was the miracle," James began, his hand resting on Charlie's head. "But the real miracle happened 3 years ago, when a broken old man and a blind dog found each other. Everyone thought I was helping Charlie by adopting him, but the truth is, he saved me." James went on to describe the depths of his depression after losing Martha, how he'd lost the will to live until Charlie came into his life. "He taught me that being blind didn't mean you couldn't see beauty in the world. Every morning, he'd greet the sunrise with such joy, even though he couldn't see it. He showed me that life was still worth living, even when you've lost what you thought you couldn't live without." Charlie listened intently as James spoke, his unseeing eyes fixed on his owner's face, his tail gently thumping against the hospital bed. When James's voice grew tired, Charlie would nudge his hand gently, as if encouraging him to rest. "You know what the amazing thing is?" James continued after a short rest. "Charlie's never seen my face. He's never seen our house, our neighborhood, or this hospital room, but he sees me, really sees me, better than anyone else ever has. He taught me that love doesn't need eyes." That night, as word spread through the hospital that James was especially alert, staff members who had been touched by their story came to room 412 to share what Charlie and James had meant to them. Emma, the young cancer patient who had learned to walk again with Charlie's help, brought a drawing she'd made of Charlie leading her through the hospital halls. Dr. Thompson, the animal behaviorist who had been studying Charlie's remarkable journey, arrived with surprising news. Her preliminary research suggested that dogs like Charlie might possess heightened abilities to detect changes in human physiology, abilities that could revolutionize medical detection and therapy dog training. "What Charlie has demonstrated goes beyond simple loyalty," Dr. Thompson explained to James. "He's showing us that animals we might consider disabled actually have extraordinary capabilities we're only beginning to understand. Your story is changing how we think about animal cognition and human-animal bonds. As the evening wore on, James began to tire, yet he insisted on sharing one last thought. I want people to know that Charlie's story isn't just about a dog finding his way to a hospital room. It's about love finding its way home. When you love someone, really love them, no obstacle is too great, no journey too far, no barrier too high. The hospital chaplain, who had been visiting James regularly, observed something profound that night. In all my years of ministry, he would later say, I've never seen such a pure demonstration of unconditional love. Here was a dog who couldn't see with his eyes, showing us all how to see with our hearts. As night fell over Seattle, the crowd in room 412 gradually dispersed, leaving James and Charlie alone once again. The blind dog resumed his position beside the bed, but this time he let out a series of soft whimpers, something he hadn't done since the night he first arrived. Sarah, who had stayed late to monitor James, noticed Charlie's unusual behavior. The dog seemed more restless than usual, constantly adjusting his position to maintain physical contact with James. When she checked the monitors, everything appeared stable, but Charlie's agitation continued to grow. I think he's trying to tell us something, Sarah told Dr. Rodriguez when she called her at home. I've never seen him like this before. As midnight approached, a strange calm settled over room 412. The usual beeping of medical equipment seemed muted, and even the typical hospital sounds from the hallway grew quieter. Charlie lifted his head and let out a single soft howl, a sound that would haunt everyone who heard it for years to come. In the early hours of that July morning, as the first hints of dawn began to color the Seattle sky, room 412 became the site of one final miracle. Charlie, who had maintained his vigil for nearly 6 weeks, suddenly raised his head and placed it gently on James's chest. The monitors showed no change, but Charlie's behavior told a different story. Sarah Mitchell, who had refused to leave her post after Charlie's earlier distress, witnessed what happened next. It was like watching a conversation without words, she recalls, tears still welling up at the memory. James opened his eyes one last time, smiled at Charlie, and whispered something I'll never forget. Thank you for helping me see. At exactly 4:17 a.m., James Anderson took his final breath. In that same moment, Charlie let out a soft whimper, the gentlest of sounds, yet it echoed through the quiet hospital corridor like a bell. Then, for the first time since his miraculous arrival, Charlie stood up and walked to the window, his unseeing eyes turned toward the rising sun. There was something profoundly peaceful about that moment, Dr. Rodriguez would later write in her medical journal. It wasn't just a death, it was a completion. Charlie had fulfilled his mission, ensuring James didn't have to make his final journey alone. The news of James's passing spread quickly through the hospital, bringing tears to the eyes of staff members who had witnessed their extraordinary story. But it was what happened next that truly captured the essence of Charlie's remarkable spirit. Instead of withdrawing in grief, Charlie did something unexpected. He began visiting other patients on the oncology floor, seemingly drawn to those who needed comfort the most. The blind dog, who had navigated across the city to find his owner, now used his extraordinary sensitivity to find others in need of healing. Mrs. Thompson, as arranged, officially adopted Charlie, but their home was no longer just their own. 3 times a week, they would make the journey to St. Mary's, where Charlie had become an official therapy dog, the first visually impaired therapy dog in the hospital's history. Charlie's story didn't end with James, Mrs. Thompson explains, watching Charlie comfort a young chemotherapy patient. In many ways, it was just beginning. He's showing us that even our deepest losses can lead to new purposes, new ways of loving. The impact of Charlie and James's story continued to grow. The Seattle Animal Shelter reported a 300% increase in special needs pet adoptions. The hospital's new therapy dog program, named Charlie's Vision, became a model for hospitals nationwide. Research inspired by Charlie's extraordinary journey led to groundbreaking studies in animal cognition and human-animal bonds. Emma, the young cancer patient who learned to walk again with Charlie's help, eventually went into remission. On her last day of treatment, she walked out of the hospital holding Charlie's leash, just as she had done during those difficult days after her surgery. Charlie taught me that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave, she said, echoing James's wisdom about seeing with the heart. Dr. Thompson's research paper on Charlie's navigational abilities was published in a leading scientific journal, challenging previous assumptions about the limitations of blind animals. What we witnessed with Charlie wasn't just a remarkable story, she wrote. It was a paradigm shift in our understanding of the depths of animal consciousness and the power of emotional bonds. 1 year after James's passing, St. Mary's unveiled a memorial in the hospital garden, a bronze statue of a golden retriever with gentle, unseeing eyes, leading a person forward. The plaque reads, "In memory of James Anderson and his faithful friend Charlie, who taught us that love sees with the heart." Charlie continued his work at St. Mary's well into his senior years, touching countless lives with his gentle presence. Each morning before beginning his rounds, he would stop briefly at room 412, now transformed into a special therapy room for the Charlie's Vision program. Staff members swear that in these moments, his tail would wag just as it did when James was there. The security footage of Charlie's incredible journey to find James has been viewed millions of times online, inspiring documentaries, books, and countless acts of compassion. But perhaps the most profound legacy of their story lives on in the simple truth James shared in his final days, that love doesn't need eyes to see, and that sometimes the greatest miracles come through those we might consider broken. Today, Charlie's story serves as a reminder that true love knows no boundaries, that loyalty can overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are those who navigate through their own darkness to bring light to others. In the end, the miracle in room 412 wasn't just about a blind dog who found his way to his dying owner. It was about the endless ways love continues to find its way home.